As months dragged on, their courage faltered. Blackborough's leg became infected with gangrene and had to be amputated. Doubts grew. Was Shackleton still alive? Had his boat sunk? After 4 months and 6 days, Frank made a decisive move. They packed their bags, not to wait for rescue, but to attempt sailing to Deception Island. Yet before they could leave, a ship appeared on the horizon. It was the Yelcho, and Shackleton was aboard. The men shouted in disbelief, finally seeing their leader alive. After nearly 2 years of battling ice, mountains, and ocean, Shackleton and his crew were reunited and ready to return home. Upon landing, the welcoming crowd was so enthusiastic, they nearly pushed them back into the sea. It was a miraculous outcome. Shackleton left with 27 men and returned with all 27 alive, an extraordinary testament to his leadership, the crew's determination, and their unbreakable teamwork. More than a century later, in 2022, researchers exploring the Weddell Sea discovered Shackleton's ship, Endurance, resting 10,000 feet below the surface. Its preservation was astonishing, thanks to the absence of wood-eating marine organisms in those cold waters. Even after 106 years, the wreck remained remarkably intact. The weather on that day was terrible, and the Weddell Sea was especially dangerous. Locals advised Shackleton to delay the mission, but he refused. He was determined. And so, they continued on their journey. By December 5, 1914, the Endurance pushed further into the Weddell Sea. Soon, their fears started becoming reality. The ice was thicker and denser than expected. Still, Shackleton ordered the ship forward. Then on January 18, 1915, after navigating along the edge of the ice for days, the ship got completely stuck. A few days later, some crew members noticed a 15-foot wide crack in the ice about 50 meters from the ship. This looked like their last chance to break free. For 3 hours, they ran the ship's engines at full power, trying to force their way out of the ice. But it was all in vain. The ship didn't move even an inch. The crew tried cutting through the ice with the tools they had, but even that failed. Meanwhile, the ice floe they were trapped on began drifting, further and further from the Antarctic coast. Their intended landing point, Vassal Bay, slowly disappeared behind them. They drifted more than 60 miles away from land, and between them and Vassal Bay lay open water. They couldn't just walk to it, and the ship was now frozen in place. Weeks turned into months as they attempted to break free from the ice. Winter was coming. In Antarctica, winter means total darkness, 24 hours a day, for weeks and months, without a single moment of sunlight. Shackleton made the decision that they would spend the winter aboard the ship. But with winter came harsher cold, more snowfall, and relentless storms. The pressure of the surrounding ice kept increasing on the wooden hull. Among the crew was a photographer named Frank Hurley, who captured this entire ordeal through his camera. His photos clearly show how the ice gradually crushed the ship from all sides. By September 30, 1915, visible cracks started appearing on the ship. Still, the crew didn't lose hope. But then, on October 24, 1915, at around 6:45 p.m., disaster struck. The immense pressure caused the ice to shatter, and one massive piece struck the Endurance. The stern post broke, and freezing water began flooding in. The crew worked non-stop for 3 days, trying to pump the water out, but it was seeping in faster than they could manage. The temperature outside was minus 8.5 degrees Celsius, but the crew stayed calm. Some attempted to break the ice around the ship to relieve the pressure, but even that didn't work. The situation kept worsening. Finally, Shackleton gave the order to abandon ship. One of the crew members, Tom McLeod, looked around and grimly said they would never make it back home. The ship had been trapped for over 9 months. On October 27, 1915, a loud crack echoed through the air. Shackleton turned to see the rear of the ship lifted 20 feet into the air. The rudder and stern broke apart, the wooden hull shattered, and the front of the ship flooded. Luckily, the crew had already evacuated. Soon, the water turned to ice, adding weight to the front of the ship, and slowly, it began to sink. With the sinking of Endurance, Shackleton's dream of crossing Antarctica by foot sank too. But now, a more urgent question arose. Could they even survive? The crew had no radio, no telephone, no way to contact the outside world. They were stranded on an ice floe, drifting in the Antarctic Ocean. On this floating slab of ice, they set up camp. They took stock of everything they had: 3 small boats, 1 sledge, some personal belongings, and food rations that would last just 1 month. There wasn't even enough room for everyone to sleep. Most had to lie directly on the ice, huddling together for warmth. And no ships were likely to pass through this region. They hadn't seen another human being in over a year. The outside world had no idea if they were even alive. They couldn't send a message. They couldn't expect a rescue. All they had was Shackleton's skill, experience, and unshakable will. But how long would that be enough? What would they do once the food ran out? The ice floe wasn't a permanent solution. It could crack at any moment. Shackleton did the math. He estimated that their best chance was to reach Pallet Island, about 550 kilometers across the ice-covered sea. Ironically, in 1903, when a Swedish ship had been stranded nearby, rescue supplies had been stored on Pallet Island. Shackleton had arranged for those supplies himself. Now, 12 years later, he was the one in need. The crew agreed to try reaching Pallet Island. They packed their supplies onto sledges. Shackleton imposed a strict rule. Each person could carry only 2 pounds of personal belongings. Many had brought treasured items, but Shackleton reminded them, nothing was more valuable than life itself. To set an example, he left behind gold coins and even his Bible in the snow. Frank Hurley had taken around 400 photographs and carried their negatives. But he had to choose only 150 to keep due to the weight limit. These photos later documented one of the greatest survival stories in history. Food shortages grew worse. The crew had to make the heartbreaking decision to kill the puppies they had brought along, as they had no other source of meat. Once preparations were complete, they tried moving the boats and sledges, each weighing nearly a ton. But luck was against them. By now, summer had returned to Antarctica, and warmer temperatures made the ice slushy and harder to walk on. After 3 hours of dragging the boats, they realized they had covered just 1 mile. Eventually, Shackleton made a call. They would stop and wait for the ice floe to drift closer to land. This new temporary home was later named Ocean Camp. Shackleton assigned every crew member tasks to keep their minds occupied and spirits up. On November 21, 1915, the pressure on the Endurance's remains increased so much that the wreck began to rise out of the ice before disappearing beneath it forever. The crew, just a few kilometers away, watched their ship vanish. Though they had already left it, watching it sink struck a deep emotional blow. Their final link to civilization was gone. All they had now was the floating ice beneath their feet. But even that didn't last. Weeks later, the ice began drifting east, away from land. On December 23rd, Shackleton gave the order to leave Ocean Camp. They marched again, but thin ice and open water blocked their path, forcing them to set up yet another camp. With food running dangerously low, Shackleton rationed supplies even further. 1 biscuit per day. Some watered-down milk. A little cocoa. Canned meat paste. The crew began hunting seals and penguins for extra food. Shackleton also started lying about their supplies. Don't worry, lads, we have enough, to keep their morale high. In times like this, mental strength was their only lifeline. And it's true for us, too. When you're pushed to your limits, only your mind can carry you forward. Eventually, the ice carried them close enough to see mountains through the fog. Shackleton recognized Joinville Island. But this wasn't good news. It meant they had drifted too far, missing Pallet Island entirely. They were running out of land. Just 2 more islands lay ahead, Clarence Island and Elephant Island. Beyond them, nothing but the deadly Drake Passage, the roughest sea in the world. Even today, in 2025, Drake Passage remains terrifying. Waves can reach 12 meters high. Over 20,000 sailors have died here. Shackleton knew if they floated any farther north, they'd enter the passage, and none would survive. Water became scarce. Men would press ice to their skin to melt it for. They were only 50 kilometers away from Elephant Island when Shackleton ordered all the boats to be lowered into the water. This final stretch of their journey would be by boat. On April 15, 1916, the crew could hardly believe their fate. After being at sea for 497 days, the 3 boats safely reached Elephant Island, and the crew finally set foot on solid land. Having endured unimaginable hardships, this desolate, uninhabited rock seemed nothing short of heaven to them. They could hardly believe their feet were actually on solid ground, not ice. Everyone was overjoyed. However, their ordeal was far from over. Blackborough, one of the crew members, had legs that had stopped working, and another, Rickenson, suffered a heart attack upon arrival. Miraculously, Rickenson survived. The biggest issue, though, was that Elephant Island was completely uninhabited. No humans lived there, no rescue supplies were available, and there was no way to contact anyone. The island was located in a place so remote that no ships passed by. Their biggest challenge remained: how could they get back home? Examining the map, Shackleton identified 3 possible options. The first was Cape Horn, South America's southernmost tip, about 800 kilometers northwest. The second was the Falkland Islands, around 880 kilometers east. The third option was South Georgia Island, located 1,300 kilometers northeast. Options 1 and 2 were closer, but both required crossing the treacherous Drake Passage. Shackleton chose the third option, believing that the sea and weather conditions would be more favorable en route to South Georgia. The crew was exhausted, and Shackleton knew it was impossible to take everyone. He decided to select a small team of 5 to sail to South Georgia by boat, where they would seek help. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew would establish a camp on Elephant Island. On April 24, 1916, Shackleton and his team of 5 set out for South Georgia Island. Their planned route meant they couldn't avoid crossing Drake Passage, the world's most dangerous body of water. They embarked in a small open boat and faced the vast, hostile ocean. To cover such a distance, they took turns rowing for 4 hours and resting for 4 hours. But rest in that tiny boat was almost impossible. Their journey was a constant battle against icy waves, seasickness, and exhaustion. Winter was beginning in Antarctica, and the sun was visible only a few hours a day. These brief moments of sunlight were crucial for navigation, allowing them to use their sextant to determine their course. Hours slipped into days. Water constantly leaked into the boat, and they worked relentlessly to pump it out. At times, massive waves nearly capsized their fragile vessel. For a while, it seemed the boat would not survive the voyage, but by sheer luck, they persisted and pushed forward. Food was scarce, and the boat was so cramped that they couldn't sit up straight to eat. They had to lie down just to swallow their meager rations. Shackleton's courage began to waver under the brutal conditions. At one point, a bird started circling their boat, and in frustration, Shackleton shouted at it, his pent-up stress gnawing at his resolve. After days of relentless sailing, they were finally close, only 3 miles from South Georgia Island. But before they could celebrate, a sudden sea storm trapped them. The waves were uncontrollable, tossing the boat violently. Exhausted, they gave up rowing, letting the storm toss them around. Hours later, as the winds calmed and the clouds cleared, they spotted South Georgia Island just a mile away. Summoning their last reserves of strength, they paddled hard despite the strong waves. After battling storms, wind, and cold for 3 weeks, on May 10, 1916, they reached South Georgia Island. This was the same island they had departed from 522 days earlier. Joy surged through the group, and Shackleton and his men embraced. But their trials were far from over. South Georgia Island is more than 100 kilometers long, and the beach where they landed was on the opposite side of the human settlement and whaling station. They faced 2 choices: either sail 130 miles by sea to the north side, or walk 29 miles across treacherous mountains. No one had ever crossed these mountains on foot. It was considered impossible. They initially chose the boat, but it was badly damaged from the ocean's fury and unusable. Their only option was to attempt the impossible, crossing the island on foot. Shackleton refused to give up. After enduring so much, this was their only chance to survive. They rested and rebuilt their strength in a cave for 9 days, nourished by the island's abundant wildlife, albatrosses, seals, and penguins. On May 19, 1916, at 3 a.m., Shackleton, along with Worsley and Crean, set off from King Haakon Bay, leaving behind sleeping bags to travel as lightly as possible. Their greatest challenge was navigating unknown terrain with knee-deep snow and towering mountains blocking their view. They climbed one peak after another, searching for a route. When they found no path, they retraced their steps and tried another mountain. At one point, clearing the mist, they realized what looked like a frozen lake was actually an arm of the sea. Undeterred, Shackleton grimly declared they had to push on. After several attempts and exhausting climbs, they faced a steep, dangerous valley. Retreat was no longer an option. Tied together by rope, they began cutting steps into the icy mountain to descend safely. After 36 hours of relentless climbing and climbing down, they finally spotted the Stromness whaling station and signs of human life. On May 20th, 1916, Shackleton, Worsley, and Crean crossed the Allardyce mountain range, completing the first ever foot crossing of South Georgia Island. This monumental achievement was not replicated until 1955, when experienced climbers with full gear repeated the feat. Shackleton accomplished it without tents or sleeping bags, relying solely on courage, determination, and willpower. When they reached the station, they were nearly unrecognizable. Their beards were long, faces darkened by exposure, and their clothes torn. The factory manager recognized Shackleton, the man who had gone missing 2 years earlier during the Antarctic expedition. The story of their ordeal was well known, and disbelief spread among the workers. They were given food, new clothes, and a warm bed. The next day, Worsley set out by boat to rescue the remaining crew waiting on Elephant Island. Shackleton's real worry was for the 22 men stranded there. Had they survived? Over a month had passed since Shackleton last saw them, and the uncertainty was agonizing. Could they hold on without knowing if their captain had succeeded or if rescue was coming at all? How long could anyone endure such hopelessness? Shackleton tried 3 times over 3 months to reach Elephant Island, but every attempt was thwarted as rescue ships became trapped in ice. Growing desperate, he appealed to the British government for an icebreaker ship and was eventually given the Discovery, though it would take weeks to arrive. Impatient, he sought assistance from the Chilean government, which provided the Yelcho. On August 25, 1916, Shackleton set out again aboard the Yelcho. After 6 days, he finally reached Elephant Island on August 30th. What he saw shocked him. The men had survived under Frank Wild's leadership. After Shackleton left, Wild had organized the crew to build shelter by turning over 2 boats. They had lived there for 128 days, hunting penguins and seals to stay alive. Despite the cold, hunger, and despair, every morning Frank rallied the men, saying, "Pack your bags, friends. The boss can come today." But each evening, they faced disappointment as no rescue came. As months dragged on, their courage faltered. Blackborough's leg became infected with gangrene and had to be amputated. Doubts grew. Was Shackleton still alive? Had his boat sunk? After 4 months and 6 days, Frank made a decisive move. They packed their bags, not to wait for rescue, but to attempt sailing to Deception Island. Yet before they could leave, a ship appeared on the horizon. It was the Yelcho, and Shackleton was aboard. The men shouted in disbelief, finally seeing their leader alive. After nearly 2 years of battling ice, mountains, and ocean, Shackleton and his crew were reunited and ready to return home. Upon landing, the welcoming crowd was so enthusiastic, they nearly pushed them back into the sea. It was a miraculous outcome. Shackleton left with 27 men and returned with all 27 alive, an extraordinary testament to his leadership, the crew's determination, and their unbreakable teamwork. More than a century later, in 2022, researchers exploring the Weddell Sea discovered Shackleton's ship, Endurance, resting 10,000 feet below the surface. Its preservation was astonishing, thanks to the absence of wood-eating marine organisms in those cold waters. Even after 106 years, the wreck remained remarkably intact. If you visit South Georgia Island today, you'll find Shackleton's grave, marking the resting place of a man who set out to achieve a historic feat, to be the first to walk across Antarctica. Though his original plan failed, what he accomplished was far more miraculous. If you enjoyed this incredible survival story, another equally inspiring tale is that of the survivors of Flight 571. Their journey shows that with determination, courage, and willpower, the impossible becomes possible. The link to Dinah's Mind-Body Fitness Masterclass on Adaria is in the description below, along with a video on the Flight 571 survivors. Check it out to be inspired by more stories of human resilience.